Welcome back, climbers. I'm your co-host, Kaylee Floyd, and this is another episode of Climbing Mount CMMC. In this episode, Bobby is joined by Will Brooks. Today, they're going to be talking about what cyber insurance is and if MSPs really need it. We're so excited for you guys to join us in this episode, and we hope you enjoy.
We got to meet at CS2 in Denver, and we've been kind of circling each other for a while via LinkedIn and other things and been at conferences, but never really got to connect. And we just happened to plop down, sit next to each other on couch, and we started talking, kind of hit it off. So first, why don't you introduce yourself and kind of tell us what it is that you do and what organization you work at, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Bobby. Bobby and I are like best friends who never met. You know, it's like wandering the desert, but really far away from each other, and then happened to come upon an oasis together in Denver, Colorado. It was a good time. My name is Will Brooks. I work for FifthWall Solutions, and FifthWall Solutions is a cyber insurance. I mean, not getting in all the weeds here. We're a cyber insurance only focused wholesaler, so kind of like a distributor, but focused only around insurance, right? So our goal initially when we got started was to help agents understand the coverages and kind of the complexities there around cyber insurance, because back then it was really easy to get a policy. Now, with all the security questions and needs and requirements that carriers are coming out with, we've kind of pivoted and we work with MSPs such as yourself to really simplify cyber insurance, but at the same time help clients recognize that it should be part of their overall strategy around cybersecurity.
Now, when we got connected, it was at a more CMMC focused venue, but that's not what you guys only do. But I am curious, you guys have a bit of a unique perspective for those individuals that do CMMC work. Can you speak to like how you guys are viewing that industry and how you're trying to fill that gap for cybersecurity insurance in the CMMC space?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of our personal kind of belief at the company that every company that has any sort of internet exposure really should be exploring cyber liability options. So that's talking about even the smallest businesses out there, right? So you've got these really tiny businesses. They're saying, I'm not a target, whatever. Bad guys never come after me, right? We hear that one all the time. And that oftentimes is a conversation around how, criminals are casting a wide net. They don't care who they catch. They're just trying to catch somebody, right? And that's kind of where it starts. But then you have CMMC, you have framework following people. So we see this with CMMC, with HIPAA, with NIST, all these approaches that people take, the CIS frameworks. A lot of times when you're being told to adhere to a framework, you only do that framework. It's almost like I don't need to do anything else because I'm adhering to this perfect framework that's being thrust upon me and everything's good. But the majority, if not all of those frameworks don't require cyber insurance. So CMMC does not have anything in it saying, hey, you need to carry cyber insurance. I do know that when the CMMC framework was first being tossed around as an idea, it was proposed to include a cyber insurance component on there, but that got tossed out before the final draft came around. So, but then you have companies or clients who look at this and say, well, I'm not required to carry this to hold on to my certification, so why would I get it? Right. So our reason for being at the conference was to educate just on the realities of how cyber insurance funds incident response. So even, you have all these controls in place to prevent an incident, but you can't 100% prevent it. So what are you going to do when it happens?
You've got to be prepared. It's got to be part of your system that you have built out, your system security plan, your incident response plan. You got to really be thinking about those types of things. But what I find as a managed service provider myself, that is a big challenge that I was really kind of shocked, and I felt like it was almost, maybe I'm just ignorant, a little bit of a secret, is that you guys will take some of that burden off of an MSP, because so many times when clients are going through and trying to fill out those stupid questionnaires. I guess stupid's a bad word to use, but
it's a fair word.
it's a fair word. They tend to ask questions that I feel like they're just trying to check the box. There's specific ramifications. They're trying to put you in a certain box, and that if they feel like you're out of the box, therefore they have now, released their liability in some regards. I was shocked to find out when we were talking that when you engage as an MSP with you guys, that you'll go through that with the MSP and start that process, and then say, here's the list of candidates based on what you've already filled out, and you'll do that across multiple different providers. Is that correct?
Yeah, to a degree. I mean, maybe when I think of cyber insurance currently, carriers out there have applications that range from 2 pages to 14 pages, right? And there's some really long ones out there. And not to reveal industry secrets, because they're not this, but sometimes it feels that way. A lot of the stuff on those forms do not carry any weight when it comes to actually being eligible for a cyber insurance policy. Mm-hmm. So not to say those are bad things, right? You could look at that, and I mean, you could look at those forms and say, oh, well, a lot of these security controls are good to have, and they're in my opinion, best practice controls. But at the end of the day, if they say no on those things, if you say no on some of those controls, a carrier is not going to look at the app and say, oh, well, I'm not taking on this risk anymore. Mm-hmm. And the reason being is the way insurance works, and it kind of happens behind the curtain, and we don't have access to all that underwriting data. We don't have access to actuary tables and all that stuff. That's on a per carrier basis. But what we do know is that over time, as carriers say, collect information on security posture, and they say this client checks these 10 boxes for yes, this client checks these 8 boxes for yes and those 2 for no, and the client who checked no on those 2 things had an incident. So that tells us that, and when you not 2 people, but now we're talking thousands of clients, mm-hmm. when you see a large amount of clients suffer incidents because they're missing a security control, that's where the requirements come into play. So a lot of those forms involve a lot of data collecting just to help build out the actuarial tables and help build the understanding for these carriers of exactly what's needed in terms of security from their viewpoint to take on good risks. Go ahead.
One of the things that I think is really interesting is that many times when I try to ask questions or push back on some things, the person I'm talking to with the insurance organization, they don't get it. They don't understand what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. That translation piece is totally missing. And it made me feel a lot more comfortable understanding that you're going to know where we're coming from and can start helping in that process. Can you talk about how you guys are, connecting with the MSP as well as potentially with their clients to help that process of filling those forms out to be more?
Yeah. So let's talk about the agent for a second, right? I mean, imagine yourself being an agent who was in the insurance business for 30 years. Right, so you've become a master in workers' comp, in general liability, in commercial property, all these things, and then all of a sudden, this baby called cyber comes on the scene, right. And you're being and at first it was easy. Hey, you just need to show me revenue numbers. You got a policy, great. Then all of a sudden, they started asking about all these security controls that are way out of your wheelhouse, right? I mean that's what agents are running into. So FifthWall, the different approach here is that. Well, first of all, we only do cyber. So we're not masters of general liability. We're not masters of commercial property. We're masters of cyber. It's literally the only line of insurance we handle, right? And because of that, when those security controls started to become necessary by carriers, who I will note, a lot of carriers do not even understand what those security controls are, to your point before, and we can talk about that too, but they started asking for these controls, and we took it upon ourselves to say, we're going to understand what these are, and we're going to build out our kind of availability to MSPs by partnering with other vendors who work with MSPs who provide all these security controls, so we can really understand them from that perspective, so that when we come in and have a conversation alongside the MSP, and I think that's a clear point there, is that when an MSP and when a client needs cyber insurance and that client is a client of an MSP, the MSP will bring FifthWall in and we'll have a conversation alongside of them. To go back to what I was saying, this is all about overall cybersecurity strategy. Mm-hmm. So we're not just going to say, oh, you want a good policy? Get these controls in place, and then we can get you a cheap policy. I mean, we are going to talk about cost saving and all that kind of stuff, but we're going to paint a picture. Hey, let's talk about what's covered on a good cyber policy, and let's look at the one you have, and let's see if those two are aligned. Do you have the right coverages? Are you in a good spot? Do you have all the coverages you should have? And are you paying the right amount for it, right? Are your limits the right place? And then on top of that, if a carrier, now when you got this policy, you were good to go. But now, today, if a carrier were to look at your security posture, would they see a good risk or a bad risk? Right. And the challenge, and why insurance agents and even carriers to a degree are struggling to keep up with it, is because it's cybersecurity. It changes all the time. I mean, I put that LinkedIn post up yesterday where I put a rotten pumpkin and I said, this was your great security strategy from last month, right? Like, it changes rapidly. And that's the challenge of the industry around cyber insurance and why we're revolutionizing the thinking.
There's been many times where I've talked with a client and said, we need to do these 2 or 3 specific things, MFA, some other things, which are heavy hitters in the things that you want to make sure you're doing, right? But then after they saw it on the insurance policy form, immediately it started making sense to them. I'm not sure why, but so I really love the perspective that you said when you're talking with the MSP's client, that you're going to highlight those perspectives as well. Talk about that relationship, about how there can be a synergy there about helping both parties get what they're wanting, and that is the client with a better, secure, safer environment. At the same time, they're getting a policy to help get them protected, and it seems like there's a great opportunity for teamwork there. Can you kind of touch on that?
Yeah. So to address your first thing, the basic point, hey, you know what? You're not getting a cyber insurance policy unless you get these controls in place, right? That's the insurance company saying jump, and you need to say how high, because if you don't jump that high, you're not getting a policy. You must be this tall to ride this ride. We have that conversation all the time. Right. And that's the easy part, because frankly, historically, insurance in general insurance sales is based on hypothetical fear, right? It's like, oh, what would happen if? That's literally what anxiety is. So it's almost like the insurance industry capitalizes on anxiety of business owners. It's probably not the best, but it's what it is. What would happen if, right? And that's, so part of the conversation is, look, a lot of times you'll get clients to implement the security controls they need to because, frankly, insurance is saying you need to do it, and I'm terrified if my business were to get hit by a cyber attack if I'm not properly covered. So that's like level 1. But our actual approach, and like you said, the synergism between FifthWall and the MSP is really about the recognition of, it's not just about, oh, cyber insurance is saying I need these controls, so I'm going to get it. It's actually working alongside the MSP to educate on the importance of the cyber insurance, but also educate on what these controls actually are and what they're doing. And we want them to understand why do the carriers care about these things? What's the point? I mean, you have the real basic ones, like MFA is a great one, right? There's that statistic that came out a couple years ago where Microsoft said, at least in their 365 environment, 99% of cyber attacks would have been avoided if MFA were enabled. I mean, that's like, that's insane, right? But you have other things like security awareness training, which is super annoying for a lot of people. I think they're kind of entertaining, even though I feel like I know the answers already, but
we do too. We do actual custom training. We get clients in there and we do the recording with them, and we go through, because we're big advocates of that. I can't emphasize that enough, just because if an ounce of prevention, man, it really can make the difference of the pound of cure.
Yeah. And I mean, the Verizon puts out a report every year, and it's like the past 3 years, it's been somewhere between 82 and 87% of cyber incidents involve some sort of human mess up, right? The human did something. It's not just a purely technical thing. So cyber security awareness training helps. And I always like to point out, look, I recognize that some of these controls are inconvenient, right? Privileged access management's a big one that's being tossed around today. I want to be able to install Spotify on my computer. I want to be able to go into my command prompt and do these things, which granted, I'm a huge nerd, so I like to do those things anyway, but most people probably would never get to that point. But at the same time, I'm probably even more of a risk than the average business owner because I like to make those changes on my device, right? But that's the importance of it, is if I can go in and change my registry, I probably should also ask before I change my registry, especially on a corporate device, right? And that's the whole mindset, is there's reason these security controls exist, and there's reason that carriers require them, and usually the reason is they've seen where the cyber incidents mostly come from, and they want to make sure they're protecting their organized gambling, as we like to say.
Well, this might be a bad analogy, but like there's so many times where I've told my kids, hey, put your jacket on, it's cold outside, and they're like, yeah, whatever. And then they go outside and their friend goes, hey, why don't you have your jacket on? Oh, I'll go right back in and get it. And
Yes.
Immediately it sounds so much better when they're carrying it from somebody else. And I find sometimes those insurance providers can be that voice of reason sometimes to kind of help your client get over that hump and start making some of those changes that you have been harping on for so long. And it's nice to get a little validation from another third-party perspective that's really trying to look out for them, lower their liability, lower their risk, lower their cost, and hopefully lower their pain they might potentially experience in the future.
Yeah. And I mean, that's actually a great analogy, because when Dad says to do something, I don't want to listen. But when my friend, I was a youth pastor before coming to FifthWall, and I would have parents be like, oh man, I've just been trying to get my son to stop doing this with his friends and blah, blah, blah. Like, why are you doing that with your friends? Like, oh yeah, it's a good point, I'll stop. Right. And it's just like that kind of thing where someone else who isn't that main, which is baffling in some ways, because they're hiring you to do cybersecurity. Right. So why would they take my recommendation over yours when I'm an insurance guy? Right. And, but for some reason it works. And I do think it's built along that piece of, look, the importance of a cyber insurance policy, but we want to really paint the picture and educate too around what would happen if there was an incident. What would that look like? And cause you're going to have people who are willing to say, yeah, I'll definitely get those security controls put in place because insurance is asking, but you're also going to get those people who say, Bobby, you're already doing all that security for me. Why do I need an insurance policy? Mm-hmm. Right. And there's that other piece of it. And what clients don't recognize is that getting their system back up online during an incident, like let's say they get a ransomware attack, right? Getting their system back up online is only a small portion of the incident response pie. Right. I mean, there's legal stuff that they have to adhere to. There's notification, credit monitoring. There's all this state by state regulation and law that they need to abide by. And I don't know about you, but I don't know what any of that stuff is. Like if I had a cyber attack on my business, I wouldn't know how to respond. And I know I'd be calling lawyers and probably spending a ton of money to try and get that figured out. Whereas insurance says, hey, we're going to bring all those people in for you. We're going to handle the forensics, the law, the legal stuff. We're going to notify people. We're going to bring in teams to actually help with your reputational damage, like all that kind of stuff, so that you don't have to think about it. And I think that's the one of the key factors there is that clients are really just going to put the pressure on you to say, Bobby, get my system back up online. When in reality, there's a lot they probably don't know about it. So even if you do get their system back up online, 5 months from now, when they realize they were supposed to do all these notification things and they're getting hit by fines and they're getting hit by lawsuits and stuff from clients who had their data leaked because of this ransomware attack, that's where things can get really painful. So it does allow for this not really thought of incident response stuff from the client.
So incident response, let's bring it a little bit more back to CMMC from the perspective of, let's say that perhaps you've had an incident, right? And that you've reported it appropriately, you've reported it to the DOD, for example, but then insurance has got to get involved. What does that look like when that call starts to happen with someone that's leveraging FifthWall? How do those steps go?
Yeah. So first thing, I should have said this at the beginning of the podcast, but I'm a verbal processor. So if at any point you're like, what the heck are you saying? Well, just press pause. Just say, stop, reset. Right. But anyway, incident response. So one of the things we do with FifthWall is if your client has a policy through FifthWall, and I think that's the key, is if their policy is through their local agent, there's not really anything FifthWall can do, because that agent is the broker of record. So everything kind of needs to be funneled through them. But when we write a policy for one of your clients, the first thing we do at the point of, so before an incident even starts, during the actual policy sale part, when we deliver the policy, we give both the client and you a incident response cheat sheet specific to that policy. So who do you call? What do you do in the event of an incident? What does that all look like? Because the insurance piece, and on top of that, for anyone who's a partner of FifthWall, we have a whole partner portal where we have an incident response template. and I think it's on page 7, but I don't remember. On page 7 of that template, there's a whole cyber insurance portion, like exactly how to work through the pieces of cyber insurance, because it's important. Part of the challenge of cyber insurance is that you don't want to do something as the MSP that could nullify the claim, right? And that's where a lot of the fear is.
Deal. That's a big
deal.
deal.
And I mean, the first thing that has to happen is forensics has to come in at some point, right? And they have to determine just how far-reaching this incident is. How did the threat actor get in? What happened? Whose data is affected? Who needs to be notified? Like, that stuff needs to be figured out before backups are restored from, right? If there's no instance or logging of that information, and all that's happened is, oh, my system's down, Bobby, get me back up online. So you flip a switch and restore from backup, and now everything's gone. Right. Forensics is going to come in and say, well, we can't determine anything, so have fun. Like that's often sometimes causes some tension among MSPs and the insurance carrier, but the reality is that insurance always takes time. But we always try to advise MSPs and say, look, isolation, containment, all those things are really good practices. So if you have like an EDR solution, right, and that EDR solution is capable of shutting down the endpoint that the threat actor was getting in from, awesome. Like, that's great. If you have a backup solution and you restore from backups, but you never expelled the threat actor, and now they're still on the system, what good does that do, right? Yeah. So there's the things you want to try and contain the incident. Don't let it spread further than it already has, but don't completely obliterate any evidence, because it is a crime scene, right? And that's kind of the mindset we need to take going in, is that when a threat actor gets onto a system, it is a crime, and therefore it is a crime scene. It's a digital one, but that's what it is.
So I'm hoping that when the forensic person gets involved, it's kind of like Monk. I don't know if you ever watched that. And they kind of do that. I'm looking forward to that movie coming out. Big fan.
Are they making a Monk movie?
Yeah, it's coming out this year. Yeah,
I was a big Psych guy, which was basically Monk 2.
Right, yeah. So we're really pumped about that. But when the forensic individuals, they come out, they do the analysis and piece, having that is a big deal.
Yeah.
But the other aspect of it too, though, which is part of the compliance piece, especially with CMMC or any really legitimate framework, but tabletop exercises. Is there anything that you guys help in that templates or any of those types of things where they could involve the sheet that you have of running through that and being prepared, so that when there might be an incident, that muscle memory is there to help? Because that's part of the CMMC framework. You have to do tabletop exercises, as well as a lot of other frameworks.
Yeah, I mean, on a real basic level, you could easily adapt that page of the incident response template into a tabletop exercise. It is something that, from my own, I mean, I'm a huge board gamer. Like, I love board games. So
same.
I know it's not the same thing. Tabletop exercise is not a tabletop game, but sometimes it is. And I would love to be able to release some content from FifthWall that is like, here's a tabletop exercise scenario, right?
Yeah.
And provide something that's just like, hey, go through these cards and play through how you would respond to that. Like, I forget what the game is called, but there's
Backdoors and Breaches.
Yep, that one. Yeah. So I know it's kind of locked down, but like an expansion pack for that, the Cyber Insurance Edition. I think it'd be cool in the sense of, hey, you've had an incident. What would you do?
Well, I feel like we just got our next collab.
Yeah, let's do it. I dig it. I think that'd be really fun.
Yeah.
And that way there's some, we were actually going to do something like that at IT Nation Connect coming up, but, and I don't know if this is releasing before or after IT Nation Connect. So if it's releasing after, that just happened. If it's releasing before, that's coming up.
Right.
You can cut that however you want. But, yes, so our, we were going to do a talk on that, and we ended up changing to just being more general IR, but I would love to put together some tabletop specific stuff to insurance, because I think it'd be really valuable.
I would love that. I think maybe we could even possibly do a drill, maybe get a few other people, throw it together and do a recording of going through that and how that might look with someone that has FifthWall involved and how that might play out. I think that would be pretty neat, because most of the tabletop exercises I've seen, they don't really involve a real vendor from that perspective of how they're going to do that. And that would be pretty cool to try to actually see play out in reality and how that would go and the processes involved. I mean, it's just the devil's in the details. You don't want to, in an incident, be running around with your chicken with your head cut off. You've got to have that muscle memory that everybody knows what they're doing and they go do it. And then afterwards, you can kind of start thinking. But that critical muscle memory response to do the right things at the right time, the military harps on that. And I love that perspective. That's another reason why we typically hire military or vets, us, just because that mission-focused mentality is just such a big deal. And having that drill process, because if you're not planning on an incident happening for your clients or yourself, you're planning on failing, period.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's huge. And I mean, even thinking along the lines of general best practices for an MSP is we live in that assume breach mentality. So it's like if you're working, I mean, that's what Axiom's doing, right? CMMC framework is kind of your focus. So a big, like, you already have something built in where they say you have to do tabletop. So you're already kind of practicing incident response to a degree on some level, and CMMC already has like a lot around that. But people who aren't following frameworks aren't really thinking of that. And to just provide security and not have anything to, I mean, the client's coming to you first when there's even if they have a policy, they're probably going to call you. Right. And if that's the case, need to have that muscle memory. You need to know what you're doing in order to survive that incident and help the client through, or else they're not going to be a client anymore.
Well, I think part of the reason that made me just kind of like, why haven't I not been talking to you sooner, is the fact that there's that partnership. I don't really have that with my current insurance provider that I have, is because, just like you said, that level of gap of knowledge is just such a bridge too far to try to cross. I just feel like I'm going through the checkbox motions, and I'm not really getting that relationship turnaround with my client. And then when my clients are talking to other vendors, I'm like, I don't know, man. I think that's probably a good one. I don't have that faith to know that their best interests are being taken at heart, and they're definitely not driving some of those critical changes that I know those clients need, and I've had those conversations with them. But, that's just not happening. So I think having that valued connection so that with someone that you can know that they're doing to be looking after the best interest of the client is going to be critical for not just the moment now, but the future for them, and cut off so many problems at the knees. And it's just, it was kind of like an aha moment when we were sitting on the couch chatting. And I just really wanted to kind of get you on the show just to kind of talk about this. And, maybe other people were just like, hey, man, we've known this forever. You're just showing up late to the party. Well, okay.
Thanks.
Yeah,
no,
thanks.
I mean, to be fair, like what you're saying is I think there's a lot of misconception, not even misconception, it's just based on the insurance industry. The insurance is something the agent handles. The security is something the MSP handles. We'll toss referrals back and forth to each other. And that's like how business has been done. Right. I used to be when I was doing financial advising, I was part of one of those referral groups, right? Yeah. And it's just like, you're all like, you have the mortgage guy and the finance guy and the insurance guy. And it's like, and then everybody's kind of passing leads to each other. And the problem is with cybersecurity and cyber insurance, it's not like, oh, go talk to my general agent buddy who handles all lines of insurance. They can definitely help you with that cyber component. That's the challenge. So I always, whenever I talk to anybody, like an end client, anyone, I'm like, hey, look, we would love to write your policy here at FifthWall. We're capable of doing it. All we do is cyber. Like, that's our whole approach. But if you're I like to do business with local agents. That's how I roll. I would interview your agent and say, do you have someone at your agency who's wholly dedicated to cyber? Because it needs that much time and effort. You can't do 8 other lines of business and then come in and do cyber too. It just doesn't work.
Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.